We are back at your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. That makes this the Money Stop, presented by Kicking the Tires and our good friends at GridRival. It's the Cusumano brothers. I'm Steven. He is Cole. Cole, very exciting episode today. We'll splash and go, get right into things. Very excited by the end of this. We're going to finally implement our friends at GridRival and show some of the really cool functions of their platform and a few different ways to bet, which I'm very, very excited about. But before we get into all the fun and games and all that is the Daytona second race before the cutoff for the playoffs, let's talk about Michigan here, Cole. Tyler Reddick back in victory lane, second time this year. He was one of the guys that we touted entering this race. I think he was one of our sleepers in that category. And lo and behold, he wins the whole damn thing.
Yes, and what a race this was. Cannot say enough great things about the racing at Michigan. I think it's safe to say at this point in the next-gen era that NASCAR has perfected this intermediate package. Even though this is it's not really a super speedway or an intermediate track. It's a 2-mile oval, but it's interesting because I think with this intermediate package, you have a lot of super speedway properties in a sense with the draft and whatnot. It's not quite as, apparent as Atlanta in that sense, but nonetheless, I think this was a great appetizer for Daytona this weekend. And with that said, we saw a lot of really good performances from a lot of drivers. You mentioned Tyler Reddick there, it was a major surprise for me because we mentioned his stats going in. They were not great at all. I don't think he had one top 10 going into Michigan in his Cup career. And lo and behold, he scores his second win of the season, which, oh, by the way, that was my penny stock bet going into this season. Tyler Reddick over 1.5 wins at plus 125. So if you tailed that at the beginning of the year, you likely made out pretty handsomely. So pat myself on the back for that one. And this really felt like it was building up to a Tyler Reddick win. I know he didn't get the best start to the day. I should rephrase that. He did get a good start to the day because he started from the top 5 with the rained-out qualifying, but he did get shuffled back after a pretty bad restart early in the race. Then the rains came and he forced the race to Monday. But Tyler Reddick, man, he really impressed me working his way through the field. He had one of the best cars in this race along with Chase Elliott, who did not finish inside the top 10. He was one of our favorites for the win. William Byron had an excellent race, finished runner-up in this race. Also, some other standouts, in my opinion, were Kyle Busch in the top 5, Brad Keselowski in the top 5 as well. And you also had some names that we did mention in our episode finish inside the top 10. Daniel Suarez in 8th, one of our big money bets. Denny Hamlin, one of our favorites, finished 9th. And Carson Hocevar with back-to-back top 10s in 2024. Major momentum on his side going into Daytona. Just cannot say enough great things again about this intermediate track package, the racing at Michigan, and I just think it was a really, really fun race, and again, a great, preview of things to come for what we're going to see here in Daytona. And as we always say, these are the best races to bet on, whether you are a longtime fan, a new fan, someone curious about the sport, don't even know much about NASCAR. If there is ever going to be a race, or I guess a track that you want to, get things rolling and pique your curiosity with it, NASCAR, this is the place to do it. It's the World Center of Racing, one of the most recognizable tracks in motorsports. And it's just like, again, a high-paced, high-octane horse race, in my opinion. You have insane odds payouts for the race winners, prop bets finishers for top 5s, top 10s. And for that, Daytona and Talladega and Atlanta are some of the best tracks to bet on for bettors. And just cannot wait to get things rolling here on this episode because we have a lot of really fun things planned. You alluded to our GridRival partnership. They have some really, really fun things on their end, on their platform. And I know I'm rambling a bit here, but I'm obviously really jazzed up about this Daytona race.
And how could you not be? It's Daytona, 2 weeks before the playoffs. Cole, things are heating up. We've got Darlington next week, but unfinished business with the Coke Zero 400. This weekend, we're going to get the starting lineup Friday night, 5:05 p.m. Eastern Time. Let's take it to the bank and talk about some of our pre-qualifying odds, the favorites per BetMGM this week, Cole. They're going to lead off with none other than the Daytona man himself, Denny Hamlin, who has dominated this track, especially in the next-gen era, plus 1,100 for the win, tightly followed by 3 Fords, Brad Keselowski, Ryan Blaney, and Joey Logano, each plus 1,200 for the race win. And then Chase Elliott rounds out the top 5 with an odd of plus 1,400 as the top Chevy Cole. So as we take it to the bank here, and discuss some favorites, Cole, there is a lot of different directions you can go for a super speedway. And if you're maybe a new listener who hasn't heard many episodes of The Money Stop, well, we like to go with a lot of instincts on these episodes. We'll always dive deep into the numbers, the trends, things that you have to know. But as we've seen time and time again with Daytona, Talladega, and even maybe a little bit now with Atlanta as well, now that that's more of a super speedway, there's a lot of unpredictability. There's a lot of wild cards, and you kind of have to go with your gut, go on your premonition based on maybe you're relying a little bit on momentum, a little bit on past history. There's a lot of different things you can take into consideration here, Cole. With that in mind, give me your two favorites.
All right, awesome. And before I go with my two favorites, I also want to preface by saying we usually give two different drivers each for each category, the favorite, sleepers, and value picks. But for these tracks like Daytona, Talladega, and Atlanta, we kind of go, like you said, go with your gut, go with your instinct, visualize who you can see winning this race. And we might have some clashing drivers. That's totally fine. It's just about going with your gut this week, what the vibes are. And with that, I think whenever we go to Daytona, you mentioned it with the pre-qualifying odds, there's no better driver at this track, probably in the field right now than Denny Hamlin. Again, he is the odds-on favorite at plus 1,100 for the race win. And when we speak on our values for DFS with GridRival, it's a little bit different than DraftKings, so the numbers are going to sound a little bit different. You're given a base of $100 million to go off of. So Denny Hamlin's valued at $19.7 million this weekend. Not one of the more expensive drivers, actually, for DFS in GridRival. That's good things and talking values. So Denny Hamlin is going to be one of my favorites for sure. And I will say this. He has not had the best luck as of late at Daytona. He's actually got 6 finishes outside the top 10, and his best super speedway finish this year was actually 19th in the Daytona 500. However, with that said, he is still a 3-time Daytona 500 champion. He has the most active laps led with over 670. And I think they'll be racing with a chip on their shoulders this weekend because they are effectively out of the regular season points battle. They've also been docked 10 playoff points, now only carrying 11 into the postseason as it stands right now, because it was announced yesterday on August 22nd that Denny Hamlin's win from Bristol was actually encumbered because JGR actually reported back to NASCAR that there were some flaws with their engine from the race win at Bristol, and for that he was docked 75 driver and owner points, he was docked 10 playoff points. And again, I just think that having that deduction is going to weigh pretty heavy on that team, Chris Gabehart and Denny Hamlin. And they're not a team that's going to be complacent with that. Although they are out of the regular season battle, they are going to do everything they can to make up those points they lost going into the postseason. And I think, obviously the stats aren't that good as of late at Daytona, but you know what? I think that's a good thing because usually when things aren't going your way, they usually tend to go in your favor to break that cycle. And for someone who's proven himself time and time again on these speedways like Daytona and Talladega, it makes all the sense in the world for me to put Denny Hamlin as the odds-on favorite for this win. He's definitely on my radar as one of the best picks for this race. We mentioned Denny Hamlin. I think there's one other driver. Well, there's a few other drivers you could think about when going to Daytona. But in my opinion, there's one other driver that stands out. This is the driver that I can really visualize winning this race, and that's going to be none other than Ryan Blaney, YRB, plus 1,200 for the race win, tied for the second shortest odds for that win at Daytona. And he's actually a pretty steep value of $20.9 million for DFS per GridRival, and for good reason. I mean, Ryan Blaney, whenever we go to these drafting tracks, he is one of the best cars. He's up front leading laps. I think he's one of the more consistent drivers in that regard. Whether we're talking about Daytona or Talladega, he's actually won at Daytona back in 2021. He is a 4-time Speedway winner, obviously 3 of those coming at Talladega. And do want to note he has back-to-back DNFs at Daytona, but he has finished runner-up at Atlanta this season. So while the stats at Daytona as of late might not be great, he still has that win on his side back in 2021. He's still a 4-time winner on these style of tracks. And whenever we go to these venues, he's just going to be one of those guys to watch. And just speaking on the gut aspect of things, Ryan Blaney is that one guy in my mind that I can really visualize in victory lane in that really awesome black, gold, and red advanced auto parts Ford Mustang. So those are my two drivers, Steven. Who are you thinking for favorites in Daytona?
Well, I'll start by saying I love both those guys. I will definitely double down on Denny Hamlin with you, but I do want to make this, I know we can pick the same drivers, but I want to add some more perspective because there's two other guys I really like as favorites this week, and one of them is actually a value too. But I'm going to start with Brad Keselowski because Brad has not quite had the bridge of the summer he was maybe hoping for. He's only had 2 top 10s out of the last 6 races, but look at where those 2 top 10s were. They were at the 2 highest speed tracks that we've been to over those 6 weeks. That's Pocono, he finished 7th, and Michigan last week, he's coming off a top 5. So Brad Keselowski, I think, again, he's had a few finishes outside the top 10 recently, but when we've gone to the high speed tracks, we know he's been a force to be reckoned with, and that is evidenced by his work at the formerly known as restrictor plates, but super speedway tracks. Brad K is always one of the best in the field, including at Daytona. It is just a crime that he somehow hasn't won a Daytona 500 yet, but remember, he did win this Daytona summer race back in 2016, and he's had his fair share of really good success. I mean, again, look at this race last year. He finished 2nd in the King's Hawaiian Roll car in 2023 in this race. Got roughed up in the Daytona 500. I think that's the thing with Brad is when you look at all of his race logs at Daytona over the last maybe 5 years or so, he's either finished in the top 5 or he's gotten caught up in a wreck, which is what a lot of guys' race logs are going to look like. But I feel very strongly about Brad as, in my opinion, along with Denny Hamlin, I think the two of them are the best super speedway racers in the sport right now. I like the way that Brad is trending this summer, especially coming off the top 5 at his home track where he damn near won that race last week. And I really feel very strongly about Brad. In terms of the odds this week, Keselowski, I mentioned, is tied for the second highest at plus 1,200 per BetMGM. He's actually slipping a little bit. He's now plus 1,300 in those odds. And Brad, as far as a value in daily fantasy, GridRival actually has him as the second most expensive driver as well. $21 million out of your $100 million budget. So I think that's worth the premium. I think we'll get to this later. I think there's maybe better values to round out a lineup for you in GridRival, but I feel strongly about Brad Keselowski as a favorite this week, as I would any week going into a super speedway. Another guy that I mentioned before, maybe a mix between a favorite and a sleeper based on where certain sports books have him valued, is Joey Logano. And Joey Logano has had himself a resurgent summer. Now, he's coming off 3 bad finishes in a row, got caught up in wrecks at both Indy and Michigan, but he's had the speed, finished 5th at Pocono. He won at Nashville. He almost won a couple weeks ago as well. I really like where Joey Logano is at right now. Obviously, at Richmond, he probably should have won that race. So you're looking at a guy that very easily could have 2 wins out of his last 6 races. And again, we go to Daytona, we go to these drafting tracks. I think that there's no better bet than the Fords. Ever since they've switched to this body style, especially with the Mustang Dark Horse, they've been some of the best drafting cars in the field. It's a really good alliance to have. And I think I said it when we were at the Daytona 500. I would be shocked if it's not another Ford that makes it into victory lane here this week at Daytona, evidenced by your pick with Ryan Blaney. But let's look at Joey Logano at Daytona. I mean, he won the pole here for the 500. Obviously got caught up in an accident with 10 to go and couldn't finish the race. But prior to that, prior to winning the pole last year at Daytona, he had 2 top 5s. He finished 2nd in the 500, and he finished 5th in this race a year ago. He's just a guy that's always consistent at Daytona and the drafting tracks. Again, sure, you're going to have those finishes where you're going to have the DNFs where you were caught up in something that was not your fault, but there's no way to predict that. And I like these two guys as, I like what I'm getting out of 2 veterans, know what they're getting into, trying to heat up before the playoffs. And I like the way that both of their seasons are kind of projecting right now, where they've had signs of coming out of a little bit of a midsummer slump. And I like the speed that they've both brought to the table. I mentioned he might be a sleeper or a value too, because in terms of his GridRival price, Joey's at $15.3 million, which is the 14th most expensive driver, which puts him at a really, really good value. And in my opinion, a borderline lock if you're making a lineup on GridRival, which we'll get to more. You can pick anywhere from 3 to 10 drivers for a lineup, and we'll talk more about that later. But I love that value for Joey, and I love the idea of him or Brad making it to victory lane this week, because they've done it before, and there's no telling that they can't do it again.
Yeah, Steven, let me just double down on both those drivers that you just said. That was perfect analysis on both of them. And I also wanted to mention that those were the other two drivers that I had in mind outside of Blaney and Hamlin. And specifically Joey Logano. I love what I've seen from this team over the last 5 races or so. I really do believe if it's not going to be Ryan Blaney, that Joey Logano has an excellent shot to do that. Just speaking on the gut instinct and kind of the visualizing aspect of things, I really, really like Logano this weekend. I love his value as well. I think that is an excellent one for DFS. And I think any 4 of those drivers have an excellent shot at getting to victory lane. I think, obviously there's a lot of volatility that comes with betting at Daytona. So while the race winner odds are very enticing, it's also really smart to put an insurance bet down on those top 3, top 5 finishes, because those are also going to be above even money when taking those into account. So just want to double down on those 2 drivers that you just mentioned. Love what I've seen from Brad the last couple of weeks. I know you mentioned it. He's had a little bit of a summer slump, but that top 5 last week in Michigan definitely got some momentum on his side. Logano's been really close to breaking through for his second win of the season, so I am a big fan of all 4 of those picks.
Let's get some sleeper values here, Cole. I think that this is where we see a lot of the winners come from, especially at the super speedways, but we've had a lot of our winners this season come from the sleepers bracket. So who you got this week?
All right, yeah. So for me, this has to lead off with Bubba Wallace. He has come so close here on so many occasions, 3 times specifically, a 3-time runner-up at Daytona. He actually finished 5th in the 500 and in Atlanta this year. So even with the history on his side, he also has had the recency at these drafting tracks. He is one of the, I would call the tier 2 drivers. Your Denny Hamlins, your Brad Keselowski's, Ryan Blaney's. Those are your tier 1s, your elite speedway racers. Bubba Wallace can definitely make a case to be in that same vein. However, he has not yet won on these tracks, so that's why I'm calling him tier 2. But he has done such an exceptional job at these Daytonas, at these Talladegas, and for that, he has got to be one of the best sleepers for this win. He's also 1 point out of that 16th and final playoff spot, so I expect this team to be aggressive. I expect them to be running up front for a majority of this thing, and I think one thing you always see at these style tracks, Bubba Wallace is going to be there at the end. He may not finish the race up there, but when it gets down to those final 5 or so laps, Bubba Wallace is going to be up front challenging for that win. And for that, he's got to be a lock for your lineups. He's got to be a lock for your prop finisher bets. And his value this week is really good. It's plus 1,600 for the race win and $19.9 million for daily fantasy per GridRival. So Bubba Wallace, I feel really, really strongly about. He's also rocking a pretty cool Columbia car this weekend. For my second sleeper, I'm going to keep it in that plus 1,600 price range. And I'm going to go with a really a name that maybe you wouldn't expect to hear because he has not had the best speedway resume. However, we talk about the gut instinct for Daytona, and I feel really good about Kyle Busch this weekend. Kyle Busch plus 1,600 for the race win, only $14.7 million for daily fantasy. Kyle Busch has only won at Daytona 1 time all the way back in 2008, but he has finished top 10 in 3 of his last 5 starts here, and he's also led laps in his last 6 starts as well. I think what we've seen from Kyle Busch in these recent races has been really, really encouraging. I know he's not had the season that he's wanted to, but RCR as a whole has really picked it up. Obviously, Austin Dillon got that win at Richmond, and he also had a really competitive car in that race. In those last 2 weeks, Kyle Busch has finished 12th, and he finished 4th last week at Michigan. I think that's a very encouraging sign. He also led a really good amount of laps there. He led 24 laps at Michigan, so he has momentum on his side from Richmond, from Michigan. RCR's got some speed on their side as well. He finished 3rd, actually, at Atlanta in the second race of the season. He finished 12th at Daytona. So he has had some really good success on these style tracks. He's also led a combined 40 laps between Daytona and Atlanta. So that in itself is a really, really good sign of things to come for me. Like I said, maybe the stats aren't what they want to be if you're betting Kyle Busch for Daytona, but I just have a really good gut feeling that number 8 Cheddar's car is going to have a really good shot at this win come Saturday night under the lights at Daytona.
I love both those picks. I'm going to double down on Bubba Wallace with you because he was another guy I was definitely setting my sights on. And I like what you said about him because you said that he's a guy that you know for a fact he's going to be there at the end of the race. The last 5-10 laps, he's going to have a shot at the win, and that's all you're looking for, right? There's no way you can predict, like I said, the big one. You can't predict it. You can't predict who's going to be in it, when it's going to happen, except maybe 10, 15, 5 laps to go. But that's all you're looking for with these picks. You're not necessarily, it's way too hard to predict somebody who's definitely going to finish in the top 5. It's just not going to happen. You're just looking for someone who's going to have a shot at the end. That's why I like Joey Logano. That's why I like Brad Kay, Denny, Ryan Blaney, and I love Bubba Wallace as well. I think that Kyle Busch definitely is more of a gut call pick for you. I'll go the same direction. I would love to double down on Bubba Wallace with you, but I want to give, again, some more perspective on sleepers here. I'm going to take a guy that one is a gut feeling and one is more so based on what we've seen out of him at the super speedways, and that is Chris Buescher as one of my favorite sleepers this week. How about the defending race winner? I know Buescher's had a little bit of a slog this summer, but he has had some really good glimpses. He had the back-to-back top 5s at Loudon and Nashville, finished 6th at Michigan. Again, some high-speed tracks thrown in there, including Michigan, where he also had a really good shot at winning the race last week. Down results at Indy and Richmond, as well as the Chicago Street Course. But when I think about Chris Buescher, I think about a really good super speedway racer, a guy that, again, won this race last year, finished 4th at the Daytona 500 a year ago as well. He's got the win at Talladega. I just really like Chris Buescher, and I like where he's being valued this week as well. He is a little bit deeper in the odds, plus 1,600, which actually ties him with Bubba Wallace, William Byron, Chase Elliott, and Kyle Busch. So I think that he's a guy that it seemed like he likes to peak around this time of year. You know, we've seen the glimpses with the top 5. The breakout's going to come. He had the 3rd place finish at Sonoma. He's had some really good efforts this year, and I think that it's kind of a shock to me that Chris Buescher hasn't won a race yet. And I think that, again, he started peaking this time last year. We're going to see it again this year. I feel pretty good about Chris Buescher as a sleeper this week. And as far as more of a gut call, how about another guy that, you know, you look at the odds per BetMGM, and he's kind of hard to find because he doesn't have necessarily the history to back it up as one of the best at these kind of tracks. But he is one of the favorites to make the championship 4. Christopher Bell, who is valued at, he's plus 400 to make the championship 4. That's how much of a favorite he is in the field regularly. But you got to go all the way down to plus 2,000 to find Christopher Bell by the odds makers, which is barely just outside the top 10. And for C-Bell, I mean, he has started to peak this summer. I know he's coming off the rough result on the last race at Michigan, obviously, where he finished nearly half the race. But before that, coming off a 6th place at Richmond, a 4th place at Indy, he had the big win at Loudon, the rain-shortened win at the Coke 600, and then the win also at Phoenix earlier this year. So he's a favorite for the championship. He's won at a couple of one-mile ovals. He's won at Charlotte. I think that Christopher Bell is, at this point, he's entering the prime of his career. We've seen him in the championship 4. We've seen him be a competitive playoff driver. We've seen that he's a guy that knows what it takes to heat up at this time of year. And that's what separates a champion, right? In this sport, you got to look at those guys and those teams that know how to handle this time of year, that know when to flip the switch, because there's always a little bit extra in there. And I think that this team's got it figured out. And I think that with the 3 wins under their belt, plus you talk about Denny Hamlin losing 10 playoff points, they're going to be racing pretty loosely here. They're not racing for points necessarily. I think that, you know, Tyler Reddick taking over the regular season points lead. Obviously, there's always going to be hopefulness that you can win the regular season championship. But a guy with 3 wins like C-Bell, he's racing for the win. And I love the way, again, we've seen him have some good results in his past at Daytona. You know, he's won a couple races already this year. I mean, look at Daytona this year. He started 4th, finished 3rd. He had a top 3 finish in the Daytona 500 last year as well. All the results outside of those for his entire Cup Series career have not been really stellar. In fact, those were his only 2 top 10s at Daytona, which is why I'm calling this more of a gut call. And I think it's why Vegas has him at plus 2,000 this week, because he's not traditionally a guy you would think of at Daytona. But I'm thinking of Christopher Bell this week because I like the way that team has raced at this time of year. We've seen glimpses of it at the super speedways, and we've seen glimpses of it over the summer as well. So for sleepers, love your pick of Bubba Wallace, but also give me some C-Bell and give me some Chris Buescher.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Chris Buescher call. I think, obviously, having Brad Kay as your teammate, we've seen that he's reaped the benefits of that tenfold at any drafting track we go to. So, and obviously being on the points bubble, that's going to be a huge premium for Chris Buescher. I think he's going to be a top 10 car, no doubt, in this race. The Christopher Bell one, definitely a gut call, but I like the analysis you gave. I like the numbers you backed that with. I was actually kind of unaware of those top fives at Daytona the past couple seasons, so definitely more of a gut call like my Kyle Busch one was, but I respect that, and I think this is a really, really solid sleepers category, a true sleepers category when you take into account, the two gut calls and then the more refined, we see what we can get from certain drivers like Bubba Wallace and Chris Buescher. So we've done a really good job, I think, with our favorites and our sleepers, but now we have some value picks. This is where you can get the most bang for your buck, whether it be betting outright or betting for a daily fantasy perspective. So what do you think, Steven? Who are some good values for this weekend?
Well, I'm looking at guys, we're going to talk about GridRival now because this is a really great emerging racing platform. I mean, if you're a person that really likes to bet on racing, whether it's F1, Indy, NASCAR, this is an app that is optimized specifically for that. And we're going to talk about values on GridRival, which you can download on the App Store right now. And they differ quite a bit from some of the odds that you're going to see on a place like BetMGM or DraftKings. And DraftKings specifically is where you would typically build a fantasy lineup. But looking at the odds this week and what some of the values are on GridRival, just to give you a taste of it, Tyler Reddick is the most expensive driver on GridRival, which is a value I don't particularly like. He's valued plus 2,000 on BetMGM right now, which is just barely inside the top 15 drivers. But as I'm looking at my favorite values this week, Cole, I already mentioned one in Joey Logano, who is valued 14th most expensive driver if you make a GridRival lineup, but I'm going to pinpoint two guys that are the 21st and 22nd most expensive drivers, and they're both former race winners at Daytona. On GridRival, as I make a lineup, I love the idea of Ricky Stenhouse Jr. 13.9 million is his value. Again, if you choose a field of 6 drivers, you have a $100 million budget. So he's 13.9 million, 21st most expensive driver. He's got the win at the Daytona 500 from last year. He won it this race in Daytona 2017. He is as boom or bust as it can possibly get. Going back to 2017, Ricky Stenhouse Jr.'s only 2 top 10s at Daytona were those 2 wins. But again, you're looking for somebody that has potential to go out there and win the race. And to be honest with you, this race, where it is in the schedule and on the circuit, 2 weeks before the playoffs, there's a lot of desperate drivers out there. And for Ricky Stenhouse Jr., I think he's one of them. You're going to see a lot of these guys in the field. And I think I'm looking at a guy in Ricky that not only has won twice at Daytona, but he's gotten a win with this next-gen car here at the Daytona 500 last year. So at 21st most expensive, I like that price, as well as the guy behind him, and that is the 2021 Daytona 500 champion, Michael McDowell. He has put himself in a position where we always look at him at these tracks. He's got 3 top 5s at Daytona. He's got the win that came in 2021. But look at this, 8 top 10s during his time at Daytona for Michael McDowell, a guy that's really grown into his own with his Front Row Motorsports team and obviously on to bigger and better things next year. I think that in terms of looking for one final chance to win in this car and this equipment, Daytona presents a really good one. And at $13.9 million, he's actually the same price as Ricky Stenhouse Jr. in GridRival this week for the Coke Zero 400. And I just like those two guys a lot. As I'm going through all the different prices, I like Austin Cindric as well, $13.1 million, a little bit cheaper than those guys. But I like the idea of looking at the race winners who are cheap that you can throw in your fantasy lineup. And that's why I picked those two guys this week.
Very nice. Yeah, so I'm going to double down with your Michael McDowell pick. I'm not going to speak too much on that because you did a really good job doing that. But you mentioned the desperation aspect of things. I think this is definitely a do-or-die situation for McDowell. Darlington's going to be a really tough sell for me for him to win and make the playoffs. But Daytona, he's done it before. He's a 500 champion. And I think what we're going to see from this team is a very, very aggressive Michael McDowell on the track. Typically, he is one of the more aggressive pushers on these style tracks, but I think you're going to see even more of that this weekend in Daytona. I have a gut feeling that they're going to be hell-bent on getting this win, and if that means being a complete wrecking ball to make his way towards the front, I think that they're going to be doing that to do just that, to get to victory lane. I visualize Michael McDowell having a really strong race. I visualize him having a very aggressive race. And I think that he will be definitely up there in the running towards the end of this thing. So I will double down on Michael McDowell. But I will give 2 drivers just to kind of differentiate. The first one I'm going to give is going to be the third least expensive driver at $9.4 million and plus 5,000 for the race win. That's going to be Corey LaJoie. And I know that might sound a little bit weird coming off last week where he went airborne and did not finish that race. However, you look at his two other Spire Motorsports teammates, Zane Smith and Carson Hocevar, they both finished inside the top 10, those rookies. And when he got out of the car following that crazy wreck, Corey LaJoie said he thought he had a top 10, top 12 car. And when you look at the results from his teammates, I have to agree. And looking at his career as a whole, he's obviously been the best on these the tracks, the speedways. He actually tied his career best finish of fourth in the Daytona 500 earlier this year. Had an excellent shot at the win. I thought he was actually going to get it in that race before William Byron stole it. Not stole it, but he got the win. And outside of that, I mentioned he tied that career best fourth place finish. Those other fourth place finishes were 3 times at Daytona, Talladega, and Atlanta. So his 4 career best finishes came on these speedway style tracks. He's always a contender no matter when we go to these tracks. And for that, I have a really good feeling about him having a great shot at the win this weekend. Even with all the hassle he's had this season, it's been a really tough year for that number 7 team. But Spire Motorsports has had some glimpses of hope. It's been more so from that 77-71 camp, but he started off the year with a really good finish in the Daytona 500. That's his only top 10 finish this season, and I think that he will kind of replicate that in this second to last regular season race. And then for my final value pick, you alluded to him. I'm going to go with another Daytona 500 champion like your Stenhouse and McDowell call, and go with the 2022 Daytona 500 champion in Austin Cindric. His value for this weekend per GridRival is the 25th most expensive at $13.1 million. And, whenever we go to these style tracks, he is someone who I always look at as that can command the field as a leader. He's a great pusher. And in my opinion, we talked a lot about Brad Keselowski, Denny Hamlin, but I think collectively there is no better team on these tracks than Team Penske. Whether you're talking Ryan Blaney, Joey Logano, or Austin Cindric, I think all three work so well together. It doesn't matter if they're working together, if they're working with a Chevrolet or a Toyota. They just know how to get around these style tracks, and that's evidenced by all of their wins at Daytona. They've all won here before, all 3 drivers in that Penske stable. So I look for Austin Cindric to have a really strong race. He's always a contender on these style tracks. And as for his race winner value, he is valued at plus 3,000 for the race win, so tied there with actually Michael McDowell and your pick of Ricky Stenhouse Jr. So, overall, I think we did a really good job, given our reasons why we felt good about these specific drivers for this weekend for favorite sleepers and values. But I'm really pumped up to get talking about more of this GridRival action here because they have some really interesting things you can do with this app that you cannot do on the other ones like DraftKings, FanDuel, and BetMGM. But before that, we obviously got to pick our favorite drivers from each tier. For me, I'm going to go with Ryan Blaney for my favorite. I'm going to go Bubba Wallace for my sleeper. And I'm going to go with Corey LaJoie for my value pick, Steven. Who you got?
I'll take Brad K as my favorite. I'll take his own driver, Chris Buescher, as my sleeper. And I'll go with Michael McDowell as my value pick this week. And before we move on to the GridRival stuff, because I want to spend a good deep dive on that, I want to discuss what we usually call big money bets. These are prop bets. You can usually feel better about taking these kind of bets because they're a little safer. But really, at super speedways, there is no safe bet. We like to almost call these insurance policies when we go to Daytona and Talladega. So what I mean by that is pick any driver you think is going to win. Let's say you think Joey Logano is going to win this race. I think you should almost make an insurance policy in case it's a 3-wide finish. Bet on Joey Logano to finish in the top 3 because if you miss out on that plus 1,200 payday, but you still had him at plus 340 to finish in the top 3, you're golden. And then same thing with the top 5. He's plus 160. Or if you go even to the top 10, minus 150. I think that if you pick a driver for the win, you want to make an insurance policy on that said driver. Even if it is somebody like Christopher Bell, I mentioned, a gut call, plus 2,000 for the race win. If he somehow gets top 3 and loses by a nose at the finish line, plus 550. So big money bets really don't exist at super speedways. It's insurance policies. Anything to add to that?
I really don't, honestly. I think the big money bets are very situational for this weekend. It's going with your gut. Whoever you think is going to win this race, you put that insurance claim down for a top 3 or a top 5 prop bet. And you know my stance for betting on Daytona and Talladega. I like to go with 3 horses in the race. So you bet on 2 favorites and 1 sleeper. I think it's safe to give yourself a budget of $30. This way, maybe you bet $10 on 2 favorites, $5 on a sleeper, and then you put your insurance claims out. Or however you want to like dole it out and divvy it up. But I think having 3 cars in this race, 2 legitimate favorites, 1 legitimate sleeper, or like your gut call, that's the way to do it with like a $30 budget. And yeah, big money bets are very situational, depending on who you think is going to win this race or have a shot at the win in this race.
Now, like obviously you're doubling down to a sense. Like if you're spending $10 on a race winner and then a $5 insurance policy, you're doubling down on that driver. But I would say just take whatever you would normally put on and spread it, sprinkle it across the props that come with that winner bet. Because again, it's not like you're going to lose money if that driver wins the race. Like if you put $10 on him to win, $5 on the top 5, you're going to get all of that money in return. You just got to get the call right, which is obviously the toughest part. But Cole, let's talk about GridRival. I love this. I mentioned before, my favorite thing about this app is that it is catered and optimized to racing betting. So there's all kinds of almost like prop bets. Like you can parlay Denny Hamlin to finish over under 8.5 with somebody like Bubba Wallace to finish over under 9.5. So you can make your own sort of parlays or lineups from that sense, or you can make, like we talked about before, a more traditional DFS lineup. But what's kind of cool is if we go to a track that we're a little bit more uncertain about, you can make a lineup of only 4 drivers, and it changes your budget to what 4 drivers would be. And you could do the same if you feel really good. You could make a lineup with 10 drivers instead of 6, and it will change the prices and your budget and everything like that. So there's some really cool things you can do here. Again, you can also bet on F1 with this. So I know that there's a big F1 audience out there. IndyCar, Xfinity, trucks, whatever your bread and butter is. For us, it's the NASCAR Cup Series. And let's dig into this here, Cole. Let's start with what we usually do. Recommended daily fantasy lineup, just to keep things a little bit simple. And I guess, for starters, I decided to go with a 6-driver lineup because that's what we tend to usually do. I think going forward, now that we've introduced the concept, we can say if we like a certain 4 or 10-driver lineup per se better. But just to keep things a little bit consistent for the broad audience, I went with a 6-driver lineup. And I'll just list the names and see which direction you kind of take this and your thoughts on GridRival. But I chose Denny Hamlin, 5th most expensive driver, $19.7 million. I chose Bubba Wallace, 10th most expensive driver, $17.9 million. I went with probably my favorite value, Joey Logano, $15.3. He is the 14th most expensive driver. And then I mentioned Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Michael McDowell to round out my 6 drivers at the 21 and 22 most expensive drivers. So that is my field of 6. It leaves me with $1 million left over. I wish it was $1 million real dollars I could keep, but I ended up spending, obviously, $999 million to make this figurative lineup, and I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, and again, you have a $100 million budget to work with for these lineups. I also went with a 6-driver lineup just because that's what we're accustomed to with DraftKings. For me, what I went with was Brad Keselowski, who was the 2nd most expensive driver at $21 million. From there, I went with the 4th most expensive in Ryan Blaney at $20.9 million. Then I went all the way down to Joey Logano. I think he was by far and away our best value this weekend. Again, 14th most expensive at $15.3 million. Then we go all the way down to Michael McDowell, one of your drivers as well, at $13.9 million at 22 most expensive. And then I rounded this thing out with Corey LaJoie as the 3rd least expensive driver at $9.4 million with $1.6 million left over. Yeah, I think, again, it all comes down to who your gut feeling is for this weekend. But I think both of us did a really good job in picking the drivers who have had a good history at this track, the drivers who we think are going to excel in this race. But what I'm really excited for this weekend is introducing this over-under finisher prop parlays for GridRival. It's a really cool thing that I have not seen anywhere else. It really caters to the motorsports betting realm. It's a very unique thing that has not been introduced by BetMGM, DraftKings, FanDuel. And why don't you kick us off with how this thing works here, Steven? Because I think this is a really, really awesome thing that motorsports fans and bettors are really going to gravitate towards.
It's pretty cool. So basically, they call it better or worse because over under could get confusing based on if you finish under 8.5, is that worse or is it better than eighth place? But basically, you can choose however many of these props that you feel good about, and the more you choose, the more it multiplies your payout. So if you pick, let's say, two bets, Denny Hamlin to finish better than 8.5 and Christopher Bell to finish worse than 10.5, you'll get 3 times your money. And if you pick 3 drivers, that multiplies to 6 times your money. Now, let's say you pick 6 drivers, you can multiply your money by 35 times because obviously, like any parlay, the more picks you make in it, the significantly less likely it is to happen. But I think what makes this interesting that you alluded to, Cole, is that there are no other platforms that provide anything like this. So if you're a racing head, a gearhead, and you love NASCAR, IndyCar, F1, whatever it may be, this is a really good platform to maximize your knowledge. And I like this a lot because, as I mentioned before, with the freedom and flexibility to make all different kinds of DFS lineups on this app, if you go to a track like Daytona that you're maybe less confident about, you can maybe pick only 3 drivers and multiply your money by 6. And I like this platform quite a bit. So let's dig into this a little bit. I do want to also mention they have head-to-head driver matchups that work the same way. So there's a lot of head-to-head driver matchups where if you go somewhere like DraftKings, there might only be 6, but I think there's 10 on here. And you can pair those together to multiply your money by the same factors that I just mentioned. But talking about the better or worse, because this is pretty unique, what were some of your favorite props on here to pair together, Cole?
Yeah, so with this better or worse parlayable props, you can do up to 8 drivers. For Daytona, I think a good happy medium is going to be like 4 to 6 drivers because the odds of picking 8 drivers and getting those all correct is it's not very good. So the drivers that I went with, and you might disagree with me on this, so I went with Christopher Bell, his position of 10.5. I did worse. I do not like how he's run on these style tracks. I know you had the stats from Daytona he's had in the past, so definitely agree to disagree on that one. I went with Christopher Bell, worse than 10.5. I went Tyler Reddick, worse than 9.5. Joey Logano, better than 8.5. Ryan Blaney, better than 7.5. Bubba Wallace, better than 9.5. And Denny Hamlin, better than 8.5. So 6 drivers there. There's 2 ways you can do this. You can go all in and bet all 6 of those drivers to finish better or worse than where I predicted. And if it ends up working out, then you get the full allotment. If you bet $10, you get $350 back. However, there is a true insurance policy called safety car, and it's basically where you can get up to 2 legs wrong in this parlay, and you still get a payout back. So with the $10 bet in mind, if you were to get all 6 correct with the safety car applied, it would be a $200 payout as opposed to $350 payout. So that's still a really good return on investment if you want to put that insurance policy down. If you were to only get 5 of those 6 correct, that's a $15 payout. And if you were to get 4 out of those 6 correct, it's a $4 payout. So I love this feature here. I think the safety car aspect of things, it really puts betting more in the bettor's hands. And it's just a really good payout, a really good insurance policy, especially for a track like Daytona where things aren't as likely to, come to fruition. That's kind of where my head's at. I like those 6 prop finishes. Logano better than 8.5, Blaney better than 7.5, Wallace better than 9.5, Hamlin better than 8.5, and then Reddick under 9.5 and Bell under 10.5.
Yeah, we had a lot of picks in common. I ended up going with 6 picks here. I did Denny better, I did Bubba better, I did Brad Keselowski better. Austin Cindric, I think better than 13.5 is a great value. And I chose 2 worse. I chose Kyle Busch worse than 9.5. I just think anything that has gone wrong, can go wrong for him, has gone wrong besides last week. And then I thought Austin Dillon worse than 14.5, even though it's a high number. I just think that he's another guy that's going to be going for broke after, the way that the last couple weeks have played out for him with his playoff eligibility being stripped and knowing that this is a big opportunity for him. But that would be 35 times my money without the safe car. But I think that We have a lot of picks in common there, which is definitely a good sign. And I'm just really excited to play around with this when we go to like a more traditional track too, like Darlington, because I think it's going to be risky to pick 6 drivers like that at a race like Daytona, because when you read deeper into the tea leaves, I'm basically predicting in that set of 6, I'm predicting that 4 of the drivers that are going to finish inside the top 9, which is very difficult to do at any track, let alone Daytona. But I think when we get to somewhere more conventional, I'm very excited to see how this breaks out for us.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It's very tough alone betting on Daytona, but for something like this, it's definitely a bit more challenging as well with the over-under finishes. But however, there are certain drivers where they've had success here in the past. They've had recency on their side to where maybe it's not as bad. And I think having that insurance policy with the safety car applied is a really, really cool thing to mess around with. This whole app in general is really awesome, and I cannot wait to dig into it more. Like you said, as we get to the more traditional tracks, heading into the playoffs, heading into the regular season finale, this is going to be a really fun partnership to have, and I cannot wait to, build it further and build up this app and this platform, because I think that GridRival is doing some really, really great things in the motorsports betting space. It's a perfect fit for the money stop.
Could not agree more, Cole. And as we talk about the money stop with all of our money-themed segments here, let's take it to the bank. Let's put our money where our mouth is and talk about our race winner picks. Last week, we had Denny, we had Kyle Larson. Both were good picks, but obviously things did not play out in our favor with those. But you had a really good sleeper pick in Kyle Busch, who had one of his best runs of the entire season. As we go to Daytona, Cole, I've got the first pick, and you can go so many different directions with the first pick at a super speedway, but I will take Brad K. You got to go with your gut. I feel at this moment in time, maybe it'll change before Sunday, but I think that right now, before Sunday's night race at Daytona, specifically about 24 hours before, I am feeling a Brad Keselowski win at Victory Lane to head into the playoffs.
Awesome. Always a great pick for Daytona. Truthfully, I know the race is literally tomorrow. We're recording on Friday here. But I still really don't have that one driver I've kind of visualized in Victory Lane. But right now, like after going through this episode, I love what you said about Joey Logano. He was kind of my gut as well. I couldn't leave off Denny Hamlin. I couldn't leave off Ryan Blaney. I like Joey Logano a lot this weekend. He's the one guy that I'm kind of like visualizing at this moment, getting that checkered flag, getting a second win of the season. I think there's no doubt in my mind it's going to be a Ford Victory Lane this weekend. It just feels like it's amounting to that. So give me Joey Logano for the race win. And for my sleeper, I'm going to go with Corey LaJoie. I know he's had a really rough season. I know he had a rough last week at Michigan. But I think there's something to be said about how this driver and how this team has done on these speedways. Again, I mentioned how well Carson Hocevar and Zane Smith finished last week with the top 10 finishes. Corey LaJoie's got those career best finishes of 4th, only on the drafting style tracks. And he had a really good shot at the win here in the 500 earlier this year. So give me Corey LaJoie for a sleeper this weekend.
I like that a lot. I'll go with, give me some Austin Cindric for my sleeper. I just, ever since you and I saw Austin Cindric win in his Daytona 500 debut, he's just a guy that I always feel good about when we go to Daytona and any of the super speedways. But he's a fantastic pusher. He's a fantastic leader. He has a knack for this style of racing with Team Penske. And I've been very upfront about the fact that I think a Ford's going to win this race. And I would not be shocked if it's an outlier, somebody that punches their ticket into the playoffs and makes things even more interesting going into Darlington. This is one of our favorite races of the year, Cole. It's the Coke Zero Sugar 400. It used to be on 4th of July weekend. I don't know about you. I feel like I loved this race 4th of July weekend. A lot of people did. But having it right before the playoff cutoff adds so much parity. And I feel like selfishly for me, ever since they changed it, working in professional baseball like I do, I always have games on the 4th of July now, or 4th of July weekend, so I wouldn't be able to watch it anyway. So I feel like, selfishly, in my situation, I almost appreciate it more where it is now, only because of, my line of work. But love this race as just kind of a really summer feel, but it has a very different tenor when you talk about all the guys that are trying to fight to get into the playoffs, and we've seen this race. It has not disappointed at any point since they've made this change. And it's going to be Saturday night, 7:35 Eastern time, Cole. It's going to be good stuff.
Yeah, I cannot wait. I think, there's so much unpredictability when we come to these tracks, but having this race now not as the regular season finale, but the second to last race of the regular season, it has brought so much excitement. I think there's more of a calculated feel to it with the playoffs on the line. So while it is very unpredictable, obviously, by nature, I think there is more of a calculation to the madness, and it's made for some really, really good racing. You're seeing guys like race for the stage wins, race for points, but yet when it gets down to it, it's still Daytona. Like, people are going to go all out for that win. They're going to cause mayhem towards the end, and it's just really spawned some really, really fun times. I do agree. Personally, I was a big fan of the 4th of July weekend. There's been so many iconic moments in that, in that space. But this, in its own right, has become a really, really good stop on the circuit, a really good changing of the tides on the schedule. And I expect nothing less than an exceptional race this weekend in Daytona.
It'll be great. Cole, we're going to drop the jack on the most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. This has been the Money Stop with the Cusumano brothers. For Cole, I'm Steven. We will see you all next week. Hopefully you're tailing us and making some money, but after this, we've got only 11 races left and one more before the playoffs, but things are really heating up. So thanks so much for tuning in. Give us a shout on Apple, Spotify, wherever you may be tuning in to your favorite podcast, and even social media at @_Money Stop. But once again, for Cole, I'm Steven, and we'll see you guys next week.